Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow. Welcome to another episode of Tech Interviews. On this week's show, I'm talking to actually one of my favourite vendors. Anybody who knows me and has seen my content before or listened to the show before knows I've spent a lot of time working with Netapp over probably the last 15, 16 years. And they're a company who's gone through a huge transition, have started to really focus on how they can utilize public cloud for their enterprise customers to deliver a whole range of services. So I wanted to explore that a little bit, but not too Netapp focused to do that. But I think Netapp are a really good example of how some of this stuff can be done and how we can kind of improve that whole public cloud, private data center integration piece. So what I thought I'd do is hook up with my, one of my best Netapp buddies. I think it's fair to say. And for anybody who's ever seen some of the stuff I've done from Netapp Insight before will be more than familiar with this person. So welcome to Tech Interviews. It's Phoebe Goh. Hi, Phoebe.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. When you said one of your favorite vendors, I was like, I'm currently preparing for Netapp Insight, which is our big conference. And so I was like, yeah, the last time we caught up was probably in person at the last Netapp Insight. And so, yes, it's great to be here and to be chatting with you.
So back in the day when, of course, we were allowed to meet other human beings in spaces, they were indeed. Seems such a long time ago. So we're going to be talking really about this kind of idea of I've kind of entitled this episode "Building a Bridge to the Cloud," but we were talking before we recorded around this idea of joining up the dots, and so I kind of want to explore that. But before we jump into the topic, for those who've not seen you before or have not come across some of the stuff that you do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do?
Oh, of course. Yes. So my name is Phoebe Goh. I am an Australian who is currently living in Michigan, USA, which means that I haven't been home for over a year. I work in our solutions engineering team at Netapp. I'm actually in a role where I help enable the rest of our solution engineering, all of our technical team, to be successful with our products, with our story, with the vision. And I get to talk to a lot of our product teams, and I get to talk to a lot of our customers through our EBC program, which is called the Data Visionary Center, the DVC. And I get to talk to amazing partners like you, Paul. So that's kind of my role in a nutshell. But I also love looking at what is happening in the industry and trying to put some sense around it and trying to make some reality, cut through some of the kind of marketing, I guess, that's out there. So that's why I really like this topic today.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the background to why we thought this would make an interesting podcast, because I think there's that kind of looking more widely at what the industry are doing and some of the challenges that enterprises. And when we talk about enterprise, I don't think people should be put off that means it's a company with a gazillion people across 30 countries. An enterprise really is a business of any size. And I think certainly we kind of touched on about that idea where we used to be able to meet people probably 7 or 8 months ago. But in the last 7 or 8 months, the reality is that the business world has changed hugely, which means now's as good a time as any, I guess, to kind of start to look at how can we take advantage of this ever-changing technology environment and this ever-changing business environment we're in. How can we start to take advantage of those kind of things to allow us to be more effective in what we do and allow us to be more flexible in the way that we operate? So they were kind of ththings I wanted to try and explore today. Like I said, I don't make a secret of my my appreciation of what Netapp do. I'm a fan of their technology and their technology strategy and how they've evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. But I did kind of want to look at some of the wider stuff. So maybe as a starting point, maybe if we use the phrase cloud data strategies, from your point of view and kind of the work that you see going on, what's the importance of starting to think strategically about where public cloud sits for a business? It's not just about ad hoc, or let me use a bit of cloud over here, but to think more widely, more holistically about it.
Yeah, I think when you say enterprise, especially now where everybody is virtual and most business is being run digitally because of necessity, I think enterprise to me takes away size, right? You could be a tiny company, but the things that you're looking for in terms of enterprise grade, I think about, stability, and I think about managing your cost, and I think about making sure that things are running as optimally as possible and as fast as possible, and you're able to navigate your business's needs. I think that's, to me, is what enterprise is. And then when I think about cloud, well, I don't just want to be going into a consumer cloud. I want to be going into an enterprise ready cloud. And so the kinds of technologies that I think these businesses are looking for are ways to leverage the cloud to make it enterprise, to make sure that it's available all the time to any customer, to anywhere, anyone in the world, anywhere, at any time. And I think those sorts of decisions are driving a lot of cloud strategies, because you're realizing that cloud isn't just something that's down the street in another data center. It's just run by somebody else. It's like, oh no, the cloud is going to be in all of the locations that my customers are ever going to be in. And therefore I need to build a strategy that serves every single one of those customers in those locations that it needs to be in. And as there's a lot of other things that we could start diving into, like security and privacy and compliance and all those sorts of reasons why having a cloud strategy that encompasses the globe is a really smart idea. And so I think that's where I'm hearing a lot more conversations where it doesn't really matter where you are located. Where it matters is where your customers are and where you're trying to get your services or your products out to those customers in those locations. And I'm just thinking those are more strategic decisions than they were maybe 2 or 3, 5 years ago.
So I think so. One of the things you said in there that actually caught my attention, I made a note of it. So now we do video versions of the show. People can see that I do write notes while we're doing this show. So I am listening, honest, just in case people didn't think I was. But one of the things I made a note of is we've often used this phrase to describe cloud of it's just somebody else's computer. But it's interesting listening to kind of what you say in there, that actually it's more than that. This is not just about cloud. Isn't just a data center run by somebody else. The reason that cloud strategies become important is because it's cloud is more about an approach than it is about a technology and a location. Is that right? Am I thinking along the right lines there?
Yeah, I kind of feel like cloud is a mindset. And even, in my role talking to our own technical team about our cloud portfolio and about our on-premises portfolio, it's kind of like, I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm having the same conversation with you. And I love our on-premises product in our portfolio there as much as I love the cloud. Like, I'll get a lot of people saying, oh, Phoebe, you don't care about that because you're the cloud girl. And I'm like, no, it's really cool. We have this technology that bridges that. Oh, there's that word, bridges. That really, like, it doesn't matter. It's building the right foundations for the customer, and it doesn't matter whether it happens to be in your data center or somebody else's data center or in the cloud, or which public cloud, as long as it's helping you do things in a better, faster, maybe cheaper way. I think that's, to me, is a cloud mindset. And I think it's a transition. It's kind of like the DevOps thing, how everybody went, DevOps it's not a technology, it's a culture. Cloud is the same thing. It's a culture, it's a mindset. And yeah, so that really speaks to me, Paul. I think that.
And I think that idea of cloud is a culture, cloud is a mindset, kind of goes back to where we started the question, the importance of having a cloud strategy, because you don't necessarily need a strategy if all you're using cloud for is I'm going to do some compute over there, because I'm going to do a bit of computing in the public cloud is maybe along the lines of, I'm just buying another server, or I'm just going to create another VM to run something in. That's not a mindset change. That's just happening to do something. That is actually just using somebody else's computer, I guess.
Right.
But I'm with you. I think that idea of using cloud becomes a mindset because it's much more about a way of working. It's not so much. It isn't a technology shift as much as it is kind of a mindset and attitude shift. And I think that speaks a lot to the idea of the importance of having a strategy to do that. And I wanted to pick up on something else you just mentioned, because we talked about this a little bit before we started talking, and again, it was something I made a note of because I thought it was a really smart saying, was the idea that when you're talking to your customers, as somebody who works for Netapp, when you're talking to their customers, they're talking about, depending who you're speaking to. If you're talking to people who work in a data center, you're talking to them about making a data center more cloud-like. If you're talking to people who are spending a lot of their time working in the cloud, their view is, how do I make this cloud more enterprise? And so I've made a little note in kind of our agenda of this about the importance of when we talk about this kind of bridging cloud and on-prem, of avoiding silos. Is that something that people are still having to work hard to consider, or people not even really thinking about that?
Yeah, I think silos are human nature. That we want to put things into boxes and say, that's how that's managed and that's how that's done. And the challenge is to be really truly effective. I mean, looking at some of the customers that are really, really good at cloud, they don't let themselves fall into that bucket, and they don't let themselves silo things to the point where, I mean, I think the thing with a silo, and this is completely non-technical, it's a people thing. I think what happens is when things build in a silo, you tend to build process around it, and you tend to make it, this is the way it is, which I hate that term, right? I've said it way too many times as a technical person. It is what it is. And that's what a silo is. It is what it is. It's over there. It's how it runs. Let's not break anything. Let's not change anything. And so when you put two of those together, now you have two silos. And maybe those are your your on-premises data center and your public cloud, or maybe it's two public clouds. Suddenly you've got all these processes and all this mentality that it is what it is. We can't change that. We're not going to, break that. And I think the best companies challenge that. Internally, it's a culture to challenge that. And why is it what it is? How do we make these more similar, or how do we make these work better together? And that hybrid kind of attitude and building it together. And I think the data center, to me, the biggest silos are the ones that say, well, we're moving into the cloud. We're doing this big lift and shift. And inevitably it isn't, because there's some things that just don't, it's really hard to move, or they're legacy apps, or they're monolithic apps that you don't, for all sorts of reasons, you don't want to move into the public cloud. And now you have these silos. So maybe there are ways that this on-premises silo can leverage some of that public cloud. And now you can actually take advantage of, maybe there's things like enterprise licensing agreements or cost models. So maybe there's no technical reason, but maybe there's a really good financial reason why this app should leverage cloud, and vice versa. I mean, there's lots of reasons the other way around. So, and I think all of this, going back to it, is the culture, and it's the mentality. It's not so much now the technology, and I know I'm really excited about some of our technology where it lets you, tier into the cloud, or have your own, bridges between the clouds to replicate data. I think those sorts of technologies just mean that it now is purely a cultural challenge, and less about we don't have a pipe that does that, or we don't have a widget that does it. Now you do. And we can make those widgets, and we can help you with that, and we can make it sure that those technologies are sustainable and meet all your quality and your security and privacy needs. Okay, so now it's just, how do you change your business, and how do you change your mindset to leverage those technologies? And I think that's a harder problem, but I think it's probably more of a fun one to try and solve.
Well, I think I know last time that we kind of, and I think last time was when you made the mistake of inviting me on the podcast that you host. But we talked about this idea of tactical use of cloud, and I thought it was interesting kind of the way you described that. And that's that idea of using public cloud where it makes sense. So you may, it's not necessarily about all in, everybody going into public cloud in one go. It doesn't have to be all in, it doesn't have to be all out, but it's about looking at where cloud allows you to do things that are very difficult to do on-prem a lot of the time. So, cloud's good at scale, cloud's good at commercial flexibility, cloud's good at automation and speed of deployment. And on-prem, that can be quite difficult. And I think that idea of looking at how you kind of close, so while you may have two silos running together, it's a little bit about, well, how do I tie those silos together, if you like, so that one can take advantage of the other? Oh, I've got a dog in the background. That's exciting. Don't know if you can hear that. So, but how you tie those two things together, and you talked actually before we started recording about this idea of joining the dots together, so what are kind of some of the approaches that you're seeing in terms of joining dots together? How are you seeing that being done? Feel free to talk about kind of what Netapp are doing in that space, if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think okay. So I was thinking about this as well. I love the idea of dots because I'm a visual person, so I can see them right in my head. I'm like, oh, okay. So there's this space which is I have an on-premises data center and I want to start leveraging cloud. How do I choose which things go there? That's the biggest, that's one big question is which ones move first. And I think that, okay, well, the easiest way to join those dots is start with your low impact, maybe not so critical, business critical applications, and let's start moving their backups into the cloud, or let's put their archive into the cloud. That's kind of a safe bet, where you go, oh, it's not something that I'm going to have to yank out in a hurry. It's not something that I'm going to worry if it's not running properly in the cloud, because it's a backup or something. So I think that's a nice easy step. But I also see companies saying, well, I want to start using the cloud to save money. That's the other, the other dot that they want to join up is like, okay, so how do I make the most of my my budget that I've got? And I think that's a nice dot. You can join those dots really easily using things like object storage. Okay, you said I could talk about our technology, and I think it's a really neat one, which is tiering, object to object from your primary workloads into object in the cloud, because that's something that you're saying, well, I'm still maintaining the performance and the ease of access that I have for my on-premises workloads, and I'm tiering out the cold storage, which I'm not accessing so much, into a cost-optimized object store. Okay, that's nice. That's also dots. And then you want to join the two up, and you want to say, well, now I'm going to have my primary workload, and I'm going to maybe that's still running on premises. I want to start moving it into the cloud. Well, I can replicate it into the cloud, maybe using a NetApp technology, maybe using some other method. And then I want to also do the tiering and the backup in the cloud. So you're sort of taking baby steps, I suppose, where each one builds on the previous, where you're not necessarily re-architecting the wheel every single time you're doing it. You're saying, okay, I'm going to use a little bit more of the cloud, a little bit more of the cloud, a little bit more of the cloud. And I think that's a nice way of going from, on premises into the cloud and doing that, unlocking, your data center and saying, hey, my data center is not a silo anymore. It's now a little bit more of a cloudy environment. And then you can kind of keep building that out, or you could say, well, I think that's great for this application, this workload. I'm done. And then I think that there's the opposite. When you're in the cloud already, you've moved applications, you've built them in the cloud, and you want to do the opposite. You want to say, well, how do I build some of that really cool data center high availability kind of capabilities into my cloud? Or wow, when I run this on premises on my, this super expensive server, this gets this kind of level of performance. How can I always get that in the cloud? Because the cloud is a shared pool of resources, yada, yada. So I think that you can start to see how there's like, you kind of look at the two environments and you go, well, I'm not going to mirror them, but I want to start leveraging the capabilities of the cloud that are going to give me that same experience. And that's the flip side of it, which is going, well, I want to take the cloud and really make it better as though it were a data center without the operational cost of running a data center and without having to buy really big servers and without having the excess resources that I'm not ever going to use because, it was for this little project. I can turn them off when I don't need them. So I think I see all these kind of pools of opportunity or dots of opportunity. Let's stick to the same analogy, right? And I think it's just kind of like digging down and drilling into those dots and going, oh, here's some opportunities that you can start to leverage the cloud for, or we could start to leverage enterprise cloud services for.
So Phoebe, I thought it was really interesting what you just said, and it's actually something I think we spoke about a little while ago in one of the conversations that we didn't record for the rest of the world to kind of be a part of. And this is this idea about the more seamless that we can make some of this stuff. the better it's likely to be, and the more easy it is, more easy. I don't even sure that's grammatically correct, but the easier it is
Easier.
for people to adopt. And the reason that making it easy to adopt is important is because it'll allow people to focus more on the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. We talked earlier on, didn't we, about the idea that public cloud is about changing the way that we work. And so, so is that something that you're seeing? If we can make this kind of stuff more seamless for people, and more straightforward for them to adopt, that they will find it much easier to start to use cloud in kind of these tactical ways to do things that they find difficult to do on-prem.
Oh, for sure. I know that as a technical person, I just want to know everything. And I think I've kind of come to terms, and maybe it's age, but I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to know everything, and I'm not going to have enough hours in the day if I want to learn everything, especially when it comes to cloud technologies. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff. My to-do list of things to learn just gets longer and longer. So I think the seamlessness is tied to also simplifying some of that complexity and some of that confusion over, it could be a simple question like, which virtual machine size do I choose when I move into the cloud? Like, I think those questions they're innocuously simple, but they're not because they can affect all sorts of things like your cost, like the way that your machine runs, whether it's going to, handle your workloads. And so if you think about that is one of the simplest questions you can ask in cloud, and then multiply it by all the millions of services, it becomes really, 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 really chaotic, really fast, really complex, really fast. And so when I think about adopting those technologies, I think seamlessness in the user experience is really, it should do what you think it should do. And it should be really, I don't want to say obvious because I don't think it's obvious to everybody, but I think it needs to be an outcome that's expected. When when I press a button, I'm going to get the thing that I want. And so I think what happens is, if those cloud providers are providing the base building blocks, all the Lego blocks together, and they're providing you these great Lego, I love the Lego books where they're just all numbered and you just go step by step. So they're providing these great architectures. How do I run my enterprise applications in cloud? I think the piece that a lot of organizations and IT especially is missing is, I get here's these building blocks, and I get that this is the Lego castle at the end, but I want to make sure that I'm making the right decisions down the path. And so seamlessness is really just a way of saying good user experience, and that that process is not going to bite you somewhere halfway in, or you're not going to realize you had missing blocks, or you picked the wrong one right at the start and you've got to go and unwind it all. So I think seamlessness is about making that easy. And I hear more and more about like simplification, but I don't think it is, because at the end of the day, all that complexity is below the surface. It's just that you're maybe masking a little bit of it. Abstracting is the nicer word, right? Abstracting a little bit of it with some cool tools, right? Sometimes it's tools and sometimes it's a process.
So
I hope that answered. Does that kind of align with? Yeah.
It naturally led on to something I wanted to talk about as well, because we started this off talking about and I think we haven't kind of made this over Netapp-y, in fact not at all. And I think we've talked about in the way that we wanted to, this idea of looking at kind of what was going on in the industry and some of the experience that you're seeing when you're talking to different enterprises and some of the challenges you're seeing them trying to overcome. And there was something you was talking about there that, and we kind of touched on this earlier on about, this kind of move into cloud is not necessarily straightforward. And I think the way you was kind of describing some of those challenges that you see in trying to join up the dottiness of it all was the importance of taking advice from people who know how to do this kind of stuff. So, we've talked about this and we're seeing, if we turn it to Netapp for a second, we're seeing this kind of phraseology coming out of Netapp about being a specialist. They're a company with over 20 years experience in the data field, and when it comes to putting data in the cloud, rightly Netapp are turning around saying, well, we know data and we understand cloud and we think we can help you get kind of from A to B, do more kind of data-y stuff in the cloud, like you said before, actually make your cloud more enterprise like. And so how important do you think that is, that idea of speaking to people with experience when it comes to designing that kind of cloud strategy and joining those dots up?
So I'm somebody who's really bad at asking for help. So I think it was really funny when I thought about this meet the specialist thing, and I was like, oh, I would never do that because I would just go figure it out. But I think what happens is, as cloud, like I said, it gets more complex, and it's less about kind of asking for help, and it's more about going, well, what have you seen, and how did you overcome, XYZ challenges? Maybe that works for me. And the more of those kinds of people that you speak to, the more different, the more opportunity you have to build your own picture for, your unique situation. That's probably made up of, let's be honest, thousands of little experiences that other people have had. I think, it's very rare that a cloud migration or a cloud strategy is going to have something completely unique, and that's kind of cool because we're at that point where we've reached critical mass of people who have tried cloud or used cloud or are native, cloud adopters, and so it means that you're not going to have a completely new, unbefore, never seen challenge, likely, right? The chances of that are really slim. And so if you work with people who have done it before many, many, many times, you're going to find, oh, here's a way of solving that I hadn't thought about. Here's a way of solving that I hadn't thought about. And talking to, a company that does that as one of our key core principles working with customers is helping them move data around. I think that's one of the ways you can go, oh, okay, here's a group of people who know how to help me in a multitude of ways. And so I think that's really important, just whatever you're doing. And I think as NetApp as well, one thing that I'm really excited about talking to our engineering team is how we are ourselves a cloud company that has adopted cloud. We've made that journey ourselves of moving actually a lot of for example, our testbed environments into AWS and Azure and Google, and we're starting to leverage a lot more of those cloud native services to build our own products. And so you're also talking to a company who has probably done what you're actually trying to do for ourselves. So I think there's two elements of that conversation that could be beneficial. Plus, we're pretty cool people, so that's three.
And that's even if you do say so yourself.
Even if I say so.
Yeah, you're pretty cool people. So, but I think that I think that's hugely valid. The idea that and actually, while we record this, I'm just working on something I'm doing tomorrow around talking about data strategy. And actually, one of the points I make towards the end of that conversation is about the idea of doing a little bit of level setting. So regardless of where you are on that journey, feel free to go and ask somebody who's already done it, because increasingly there are people who have developed data strategies and they will be able to advise you on the things they've learned and the pitfalls to avoid and some of the things you might want to take advantage of you've never considered. And I don't see that being any different about moving to cloud. If you're going to start to integrate cloud into your day-to-day enterprise activities, then these are the things that you might want to think about. It makes perfect sense to me to go and ask people who kind of know how to do that. So well, look, Phoebe, I could quite happily record for another hour with you, but people will, while they may wish to listen to you for another hour, really won't want to listen to me. And you've got a life that's beyond just recording podcasts with me. So so before we wrap up, though, obviously we're kind of recording this a week before Netapp Insight. So if lots of the things that we've talked about, I guess, will kind of be some of the topics that people can expect to hear there. So is that going to be a good place for people to go? And I think it's always a good question actually for people who maybe aren't Netapp customers. Is this going to be a good event for people to attend, just to kind of listen to some of that stuff you was talking about there, kind of the industry trends, and understand a little bit about where this kind of on-prem cloud mixing together of technologies is going to head?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love going to Netapp Insight, not just to hear from Netapp, because I kind of hear all that all the time, but to hear from our customers as to what they have actually done, whether it's a cloud strategy or whether it's some kind of major transformation. They're talking about it at our conference, which I think is really special. We also have the public cloud providers themselves coming to our conference to talk about that, because we partner with all of the major cloud cloud vendors. We partner with them rather than try to replace them or to be an alternative to them. We're trying to make each of those clouds better. And so they're more than happy to come and talk at our conference, which I think is really, really special. And that's one of the things that I would say, if you don't do anything else during the week of Netapp Insight, which is October the 26th to 29th, if you do nothing else, just watch the keynotes, because they are really, I think, a holistic picture of cloud strategies. And that's not just public cloud, but that's your private and your enterprise, hybrid clouds as well. And I think that's the best takeaway that you could get from Netapp Insight. The other thing I would say people should do, which I think is a really good opportunity to do, is to take advantage of the VIP meetings at Insight. I used to do them in person. Like they'd set up these big halls and you go and sit in there and you're like in a meeting room. But I think because it's virtual now and you could just book a 30-minute meeting with somebody who really, really understands a certain technology or your industry, or just somebody you want to chat to, like me or somebody like that. I think those are really cool, and I would highly recommend that. Even if you're not a Netapp customer, they are really good opportunities to do that meet the specialist activity that we were just talking about.
Yeah, and I would second that, actually, because even if you're not a Netapp customer, I think the opportunity to go, we talked before about that kind of idea of doing a bit of a level set. If you're starting to build that kind of cloud data strategy, then take some time. So I'm based in EMEA, so it's the 29th of October is the EMEA version of Insight. And as you said, Phoebe, it's kind of running for 3 days during that week for different regions. It's a good opportunity to go and do that. Listen to what some of the big industry specialists are saying. So Netapp is a storage company, and as you mentioned, you've got likes of Satya Nadella there presenting from Microsoft, talking about what Microsoft are doing in cloud, and you've got his equivalents at AWS, at IBM, and I think at Google as well. So you've got a really, it's a big mix of the most, I guess, some of the most powerful people in the public cloud space. So I think it's a really good opportunity, whether you intend to be a Netapp customer, you are a Netapp customer, or you've got no interest in being a Netapp customer, but could take the opportunity to kind of level set. I think, that Insight conference is an interesting one to be a part of, and I'll make sure we put something in the show notes. So, well, look, just before I wrap up with how people can stalk you on the internet, I want to ask you one thing, maybe just to kind of wrap up quickly with, is, so if people are listening to this and, and like I say, we kind of call this building a bridge to the cloud. But if people are listening to this and saying, actually, I've got my stuff in the data center, or maybe I've got my stuff in the cloud, but I've got stuff at some other location as well, and I'd like to look at how I join those two things together. Have you got a couple of tips for people to how they might go about looking at that and some of the steps that they could take?
Yes, absolutely. So one is to really get a cloud. I'm trying to work out whether I want it to be one or two. I'd say one is to get yourself into that cloud mindset, which means know what is out there in terms of the different cloud providers. I'd say each of them has an elementary certificate that you can go and do. It's sometimes called associate or I forget what the other terms are, professional, but they're basically, they don't take a lot of study. You can go and read through their documentation, so you don't need to even pay for a course. But it gives you an idea, like this foundational understanding of how they talk about themselves and what they think they offer. And you'll see that graph of, shared responsibility models, and you'll learn about their security. So I think that would be my number one to anybody who is doing anything with cloud. And then my number two is to know what you have, and that means get some visibility into your own ecosystem, whether that's applications, workloads, the data. You could go down, what infrastructure you have. I think, there are a lot of services out there. There's a lot of people out there who can do it. There's also tools out there. I won't even plug ours because you can find out what it is by looking at our website, to get visibility of what you have now, and to understand what that might look like in the cloud. Because I think it's not an instant switch on, switch off cloud. And so I think those are probably the first two things I would do. And then from there, I'd probably engage a specialist and go and ask and go and verify my assumptions about what I'm going to do. and then, whether or not you choose to work with a professional services organization or just do it yourself, I think then there's the actual building and the fun stuff, right? Making it happen. Yeah. But I guess transformation always starts with a few steps.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true, and I think they are very wise words. So, well, look, Phoebe, if people would like to hunt you down and find out where you share other ideas around some of this stuff, what's a good way to find you?
I share good ideas about a lot of things on Twitter. And so I am at Phoebe Goh, and I'm laughing because you may not just get technology things, you might get things about cats or my recently acquired Oculus Quest 2. So on Twitter at Phoebe Goh, and on LinkedIn, I am just look for Phoebe Goh and look for the person. I think I have blue hair in that picture as well. So I'd probably be the only Phoebe Goh with blue hair.
And it would seem remiss of me, and your co-host probably wouldn't forgive me if we didn't mention your podcast as well.
Of course. Yes. Thank you, Paul. So we have a podcast called Go Your Way. We are on YouTube, and we are also on Apple and Spotify. We try to keep these episodes nice and short and snappy, and we talk to some really, really, really cool people, and they're not always in technology. And I think that's what makes it really exciting, because Go Your Way is about the people as much as it is around the technology. So yes, thank you.
There'll be a whole bunch of people listening to this and saying, Phoebe's had a great idea for Paul there. Short and snappy with those podcasts. That's the idea. So yeah, thank you very much. So, hey, Phoebe, look, pleasure as always having a chat with you. We've covered some really interesting stuff. It's a big topic, and I think there's probably a whole bunch of episodes we could do around things like this. But hey, you've got your own content to find for your show, so I can't pinch all of it. So, Phoebe, look, thanks for being on Tech Interviews, and look forward to having you on again in the not too distant future.
Thanks so much, Paul. See you next time.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all of our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you've got an idea for a show or would like to appear as a guest, then why not email me at podcast@techstringy.com. And if you want to make sure to catch the next episode, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe here on YouTube, or of course you can subscribe in all good homes of podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher and Spotify. So until next time, thanks for watching.